Shalom. I want to give all praises, honors, and glories to Yahweh Hashem, Yahushua, and the ones to the apostles and others who read Muslim salutations to the hopeful elect. This is your brother Ivan Ola from Gemma, Chicago, and coming back to you with another lesson. Alright, it's gonna be quick, and it's gonna be about Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. Right, showing you that it's speaking about you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Arab Americans. Right, but I'm gonna start with Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 44. It says, "He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail." And the head, is speaking about Esau, all right, because he's in rulership right now. In the scriptures, it tells you that the earth is given unto the hands of the wicked, all right. And that's Esau right there. And Esau is basically owns everything. All right, he owns these banks, all of these companies. All right, he basically controls the money and shit. He owns all, like, the farmland and what happens to it. All right, everything is basically owned by Esau, right? Because he's the one is in rulership right now. It says, "He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail." And the tail is speaking about Jacob. You call blacks, Latinos, and Arab Americans, right? You see, we don't own anything, all right? We don't own any land. We don't even have our own. We don't even have our own country, right? You look at our people. Our people are living in the ghetto, all right? Our people are living in poverty, suffering. Living from paycheck to paycheck, all right? It says 45, "Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy power to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee." And of course, our people as a whole, we sin against Yahweh Hashem, Yahushua. And so what happened is that the Lord scattered us unto the four corners of the earth, and had us serve our enemies, all right, which is also part of the curses, all right, the consequences of disobedience, right? All these curses have been put upon our people. And you can see when you read through verse 15 and all the way down to 68, it's really speaking about you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, because you are the Lord's chosen people, all right? And these curses, they're still on our people even until this day, which goes to show you that it's proof that the Lord's chosen people is you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, because we're living in these conditions, or we're living under the curses. But it says, and they shall be a sign upon thee and they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, because thou servest not the Lord thy power with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. Therefore shall thou serve thy enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and thirst and in nakedness and in the want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. And even unto this day, right, we're still serving our enemies. You got all, even in the ancient world, in the ancient years, right, all these nations, right, they all had a piece of, having us, as slaves, right? All these nations had a moment in time of enslaving us, all right? But the Lord delivered us out of all those captivities numerous of times. But even unto this day, we're still enslaved by our enemies. Here you would call it modern day slavery, right? And by Esau's rulership, because Esau, all right, sets up these laws and regulations to really just oppress our people, all right. You got our people all messed up and living from living in poverty, living paycheck to paycheck, or barely getting by. But it says, therefore shall thou serve the enemies which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger and thirst and nakedness and the want of all things. Yea, even unto this day, you got to come to Esau for the want of all things. Right? The so-called white man. Right? He owns everything. When you need to take out a loan from the bank, or when you need to borrow money from the bank, right, it's basically Esau lending unto you. And at the end of the day, you got to also pay that back with interest. Even though it's fiat currency, but still, Esau constantly has you enslaved. It says, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. And that yoke of iron is basically speaking about, a chain that people wore in the time of slavery. And you really see it, the Bible, is mainly speaking about our people. Our people, that being of, the chosen people of the Lord. All right? It's not speaking about these other nations. It's literally speaking about you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans. All right? There are the chosen people of the Lord. You are the true Hebrew Israelites that the Bible speaks of. Now let's go into Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Noticing it says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. All right, you can tie that with the transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trade, also known as Atlantic slave trade, was the forced transportation of millions of African people to the Americas to be enslaved. And don't mind this, right? This right here is just a byword, all right, that Esau used, but it's really speaking about you so-called Judites, all right. But of course, all of our, all the tribes of Israel, went into slavery, and the Lord scattered us into the four corners of the earth, and a lot of our people are mingled amongst, these heathen nations. They have even our people looking just like these heathen nations, but they are still but they are still, the children of Israel. You know what I mean? Their sea line still goes back to Jacob. And noticing it says, "And shall bring thee unto Egypt again with ships." All right, and that's basically what happened. All right, you got Egypt right there. We were sold into slavery. Going into the Americas. All right, and then it tells you, ships. During transatlantic slave trade, our people were on ships. In a horrible, squeezed condition. It says, right here in the middle passage, the most brutal leg of the journey was the middle passage, where enslaved Africans were crammed onto ships under horrific conditions with high mortality rates. And yeah, our people got fucked up in those ships. All right, when they're traveling into the Americas. But it says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. It's talking about slaves. If you read it in the LT, it says, there will you be offered to sell yourselves to your enemies as slaves. but no one will buy you. It says, let's go back to the KJV. It says, be sold unto your enemies for bondman and bondwoman, and no man shall buy you. And that word buy basically goes into redeem. Basically save you. No one shall save you. All right. Quana says of God originating, creating, redeeming His people. Right. Basically, no one will save you out of slavery. No one shall redeem you out of slavery. All right. And that is also the curses that were put upon our people even unto this day. We're still in captivity. Right. Esau, or he has our people in some fucked up conditions that we basically can't even own our own land. You gotta go to Esau to do that. You gotta go to Esau, all right, for the want of all things. We don't own anything. Let's go into Exodus chapter 20. All right, to back this up, it says Exodus chapter 20 verse 1. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy power, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And you can see that Egypt is talking about, captivity. All right. A land of, where we were held captives. All right. We were, being enslaved. And then when you link that up with the 6-8 verse in Deuteronomy chapter 28, you can see that when it says, and shall bring thee unto Egypt again with ships, it's really talking about America. Because in America, our people were also enslaved over there as well. And it shows that numerous, there's history on that. Right? There's a lot of history on it. Our people as a whole, you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, you all were enslaved by the so-called white man. Even you so-called Hispanics, all right? You were enslaved by the so-called white man. All right, Spaniards enslaved you, so-called Hispanics, right? And how do you think you Northern Kingdom know how to speak Spanish? Right? It's because of the Spaniards. All right, we learned other tongues by being enslaved by these heathen nations. Let's go to Baruch 4:1. This is the book of the commandments of God and the law that endureth forever. All they that keep it shall come to life, but such as leave it shall die. Turn thee, O Jacob, make and take hold of it. Walk in the presence of the light, wherefore thou mayest be illuminated. And speaking about the scriptures, all right, there's wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that makes us free, all right, and illuminated. It says, verse 3, give not thy honor to any other, honor to another, nor give the things that are profitable unto thee to a strange nation. And we're not supposed to give this, all right, to a strange nation, to these heathen nations, and especially Esau, because these scriptures, right, this Bible is not meant for them. It says, O Israel, happy are we for things that are pleasing to Yahweh Hashem, Yahushai, are made known unto us. Be of good cheer, my people, the memorial of Israel. Ye were sold to the nations not for your destruction, but because ye moved Yahweh Hashem, Yahushai, to wrath, ye were delivered unto the enemies. And that's right, our people were delivered, we were sold unto our enemies, right? These heathen nations, they had a moment in time where they enslaved us. And then our people are still being enslaved, in this modern day slavery, right, by Esau Edom, so-called white man that the Bible speaks of. It says, "For you provoked him that made you by sacrificing unto devils, and not to Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. For ye have forgotten the everlasting power that brought you up, and ye have grieved Jerusalem that nursed you." But that was pretty much to the point of this lesson, right? Covering up on Deuteronomy the 28 and 68 verse, right? It goes to show you it's really speaking about our people, right? And that we were sold unto our enemies, as for bondman and bondwoman, being enslaved under these heathen nations. Anyways, hope this lesson was edifying. I'm going to give all praises, honors, and glories to Yahweh Hashem, Yahweh Shalom.